All right. I will let you know when it goes live. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. You're all welcome to Call to Action. This is our new conversation series where we have, great chats with inspirational people in the world of charity. So our guests will share great insight and perspectives into key issues that, affect them in their line of work and also affecting the young people they support, which is quite critical, and their motivations for driving positive change, as a person. So thank you for sharing your time with us this Friday. My name is Henry, and I am the media PR and policy manager for Action Tutoring. I am all gassed up today because I'm speaking to our founder and CEO, Susannah Hardyman. This is a relaxed conversation, quite casual, and it's quite a mixed bag about everything, life ideas, inspiration, and why she keeps, the fight to create positive change. Thank you so much for joining me, Susannah.
Pleasure. Great to be with you, Henry.
Great. So if you have any questions or comments, kindly post them in our comment section and I'll get Susannah to answer any questions that you may have. Wonderful to have you as our first guest on Call to Action. How's your week been? Anything that made you laugh this week?
I'm very happy to share something that did make me laugh. Outside of Action Tutoring, I have two small children, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and my 2-year-old smashed the tower my 5-year-old had built yesterday, and under duress, she eventually said sorry, to which my 5-year-old replied, "Charlotte, are you actually sorry or not really that sorry?" And she looked at him with a big grin, age 2, and went, "Not really that sorry." So I think, personalities, cheek of children, it all begins very young.
Sorry.
It was quite hard as a parent to keep a straight face when they say things like that. Not really sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
You visited Newcastle, I think, this week. Any memorable moment from your visit?
Yes, I had a fantastic time last week, spending 2 days with our team up in the Northeast. We've got 3 program staff up there and work with a number of schools across Newcastle and the wider Northeast region. 2 things really struck me. One, how incredibly friendly everybody is in the Northeast. The schools I went to, I got such a warm welcome from the staff and from the pupils, and it was really impressive to see how well the pupils were engaging in their tutoring sessions, and they were very happy for me to come and see the work that they had been doing and to share that with me. The other thing that really struck me was just how dedicated our volunteer tutors are in the Northeast. I couldn't quite believe that everybody I spoke to seemed to have been volunteering with us for about a year or was volunteering on multiple programs. One volunteer even kindly gave me a lift between schools. And it was just brilliant to hear their motivations and their reasons for wanting to volunteer. And they were from a really diverse range of backgrounds. So I met students who were interested in going into teaching and were viewing Action Tutoring partly as work experience and broadening their skill set. I met some amazing retired volunteers that just wanted to give back and to support pupils, a bit like they'd supported their own children through school, was what a lot of them were telling me, and now they wanted to do the same, and everything in between that spectrum of students to retired, but a really amazingly diverse group of volunteers and just incredibly committed to our work. So it was an absolute pleasure to talk to them as well as the pupils and the partner schools.
Amazing. I volunteer myself every Monday for an hour, so I know how incredibly rewarding it is to me personally and quite fulfilling. So you should look into volunteering for Action Tutoring when you can. Susannah, I want your thoughts on something else. This morning I was reading highlights of the budget read by Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, and he announced 30 hours of free childcare every week for young children. And I was thinking, as a mother, what does this mean for parents?
Well, I've had a keen eye on this policy from a sort of personal level as a parent of small children, but also just more widely very aware of the impact of childcare costs on working families. So to give an indication, the average full-time cost of a childcare placement is now about £1,400 for a child under the age of 3. And if you think about average salaries in the UK, for many people, that is more than they would earn, or about what they earn. And even just for 3 days a week for childcare, you're looking at about £1,000 of your income just going on that childcare. And all of that has actually been having a really big effect on parents not being able to work, who want to work, but also driving families with children under the age of 5 further into poverty. So a lot of sort of wider systemic equality issues around this policy, as well as the actual impact on individual families. Sadly for me, I'm not going to benefit from the policy. By the time it is introduced, my children will be eligible for the existing free hours already. But I think whilst it is good news, I do think overall it's good news that the government have sat up and listened. And I really take my hat off to the work that Pregnant Then Screwed and their founder, Jolie Brearley, have done, raising awareness of these issues, because a few years ago, it just wasn't on politicians' radar to talk about it. So I think we have seen a big step change, that it is now being talked about at this level, and that there is change being made. But in terms of the actual detail of the policy, there are three things really that concern me about it. One, it's not coming into effect for a really long time, and quite possibly we're going to have had a general election and we'll have a new government in place before it does even come into effect. So there's an element of passing the buck further down the line on this, and is it going to be coming too late to really support families that need the support now? Thirdly, they're relaxing the ratios that childcare providers can have in a setting. This is partly to try and help with staffing, but I don't know if any of our audience today have ever spent time looking after a group of 2-year-olds. The current ratio is 1:4, and that's going to go to 1:5. And I think anyone that spent a day working with small children would find the idea of those ratios increasing really, really quite scary, from the point of view of being able to give those children that quality interaction, but also just keeping them safe. And I think the other big concern with the policy is to do with this quality question. What are we viewing this for? Is it about helping working families, or is it about quality early years intervention that can help to narrow that attainment gap that opens up so young? And actually, I think it should be really about both. But I think that focus on actually the benefits of high quality childcare have not really been sufficiently thought about as part of this policy. And there's a slightly odd dynamic with it, that if your parents aren't in work, you don't access the full amount of hours until you are a little bit older. But that actually means that some of the children from the poorest households that potentially could really stand to benefit from quality early intervention to help narrow that attainment gap are not getting the full suite of available hours if their parents aren't in work. Now, we wouldn't say that schooling is only open to parents who are working. We would say it's open to all children, because we believe in a high quality education for all. But actually the same is not happening in the early years sector. So I would love to see them open up that eligibility to be able to access the full range of hours, regardless of what your parents are working in your background from a younger age. So a lot
Great.
in there, Henry.
Yeah, a lot. And your passion for children is tangible, Susannah. So let's speak a bit about Action Tutoring. You started in 2011, 2012. Tell us a bit about why and how Action Tutoring started.
So Action Tutoring was an idea in my head as early back as sort of 2009, 2010. And I was a fairly recent graduate working in London, working in the charity sector. But at the same time, I got involved in doing a little bit of private tutoring work, in all honesty, to earn a little bit of extra money to pay for holidays and so on as a recent graduate. But it didn't take me long into that experience of private tutoring to become really, really bothered about the inequality I saw in the private tutoring world. That the children I was tutoring, they were absolutely lovely children. They were wonderful children and fantastic families, but many of them were already in very good schools. Some were even in private schools. They were mostly already on track for A's or B's, and they were bringing in a tutor to try and help them to get to sort of the top A's and A stars, get them into Russell Group universities and so on. And it just struck me as really very unfair that children that were already really very privileged were having this additional support on top of the advantages they already had to push them even further on their journey. At the same time, I was doing some volunteer youth work in the community where I still live today, Peckham, with some children from much lower income backgrounds that just didn't have access to anything like these kind of resources I saw that the children benefiting from private tutoring were having. But yet they were not less able, they were not less ambitious, they had plans, they had dreams, they just lacked the resources to help them to realise those ambitions. And it just struck me that there were probably people like myself at the time, sort of recent graduates, that would be willing to do some tutoring for free for those that wouldn't otherwise afford it. And that was really the nub of the core of the idea for Action Tutoring. And the idea didn't really go away. And over the next couple of years, I spoke to a lot of people about it, identified that there really was a gap in the market. There wasn't a charity at the time already doing this, spoke to schools, spoke to potential volunteers, and realised there was genuine interest in trialling this idea of volunteer tutoring. And eventually 2 schools came on board and said they would like to pilot it with me. I recruited friends of friends to come on board as those early volunteers. And really the rest is history. But actually the bit that really made the difference was off the back of that pilot with 2 programs, a funder came forward and said, we love what you're doing. We'd love to try and make this happen as a formal charity, a formal organisation. And they gave us some startup funding to try and get it off the ground more formally. And from there, it snowballed. We have more and more schools coming forward, growing pools of volunteers from a range of backgrounds, and more funders stepping forward, willing to support us.
What is unique about the great work Action Tutoring is doing is the volunteers, like they are the core of it. And congratulations, I think Action Tutoring won the Queen Elizabeth Volunteer Service Award for the Platinum Jubilee celebration. So I think that is amazing. But who can volunteer? Do I need to be of a certain age? Do I need to have teaching experience previously? Do I need to have a school in my community?
The answer is we take a hugely diverse range of volunteers, and that's one of the things that I'm incredibly proud of, and I think is one of the unique things that Action Tutoring is able to offer to schools. So many private tutoring companies would just use recent graduates or retired teachers, and we have a really diverse range of volunteers who want to tutor for love and not just for money. And I think that does make us really unique. But to give a few more specifics, last year our volunteers ranged in age from 18 to 82. So that should tell you that age isn't a barrier as long as you've finished schooling, right through to retired volunteers, those in their 80s. We do ask that volunteers are degree educated or studying for a degree, and ideally have an A or B at A level or equivalent if you haven't done A levels in the subject that you want to tutor. And the reason for that is partly for you as a volunteer. We want you to feel confident going into your sessions. This is academic tutoring of English and maths, and we don't want you out of your depth. That said, we do provide all the resources, fantastic workbooks, and for tutors, the workbooks include all the answers, they include all the methodologies, lots and lots of tips. So we're not expecting our volunteers to be teachers, to be curriculum experts. All of that material is provided. So you need to have an interest and a good knowledge of English or maths. You need to have an interest and passion for working with young people, and you need to be motivated to our cause and wanting to make a difference. But if you've got those 3 things, then we would absolutely love to have you, whatever your background or journey in life has been so far.
That's amazing. You're watching Call to Action, a new conversation series where we speak to inspirational people in the charity sector. And our first guest today is Susannah Hardyman. She is the founder and CEO of Action Tutoring. Thank you for your questions. Some are coming in pretty fast. This question from Carl on Facebook. I think she's asking, did you visit primary or secondary schools in Newcastle this week?
Apologies, I didn't answer that, but I visited 2 primaries and 1 secondary. So we work with both primary and secondary schools. At primary level, we work with children in year 5 and 6 who are preparing for their SATs. And then at secondary, we work with year 7s who've just transitioned into secondary school and perhaps need a little bit of extra help to really get up to speed with the secondary work. And then we work with pupils in year 10 and 11 preparing for those all-important GCSE exams.
Great. Thanks, Carl, for your question. Hi, Elena there. Thanks for joining our live streaming. Susannah, I've just been thinking, why is it important that we support children who have been marked as unable to attain a pass grade in their core subjects, looking at the children Action Tutoring supports in schools?
Do you mean at primary or at secondary, Henry?
Both levels. Why
At
do we
both.
decide to focus on that sect?
Yeah. So perhaps it's easier to start at the top and work backwards, but if pupils don't achieve a good pass rate at GCSE, and a good pass rate now is considered a grade 4 or above, the old system some people might be familiar with of A stars to Gs was changed a few years ago under the current government, and it's now a 1 to 9 system, with 9 being the highest grade, but a 4 is considered a standard or a good pass, and that's the benchmark we really want our pupils to get to at GCSE. And that matters not because grades matter in and of themselves, but having those core GCSE qualifications in English and Maths really do matter to opening up the door to further education, employment or training. So this is all about trying to increase pupils' life chances so that they can progress to that further study or into the employment route of their choice, and that they're not held back by that barrier of not having that English and Maths qualification, which so many employers and universities and so on are looking for in those core subjects. Taking that down to primary, why does it matter at primary? Well, we know that if pupils don't achieve a good level of attainment by the end of primary school, the trajectory, the chances of them catching up at secondary school are very, very narrow. And there's a really shocking statistic that only 11% of pupils that don't attain that basic standard at the end of primary go on to attain it at secondary school. So it's terrifying, but you can almost write their GCSE script based on how they did in primary. And that's partly because we know that that attainment gap only gets wider as you go through school. It starts very young, even before school, slowly widens through primary, even wider by secondary. So if you haven't made progress, if you haven't got back on track by the end of primary, your odds of achieving at secondary are very narrow. And that to me is it's really shocking, and it's really unacceptable that so many pupils, even by the age of 10 or 11, are sort of set on a trajectory of how they might achieve. And we want to change that. We want to give them the best shot possible of leaving primary school really confident in their English and Maths, having attained that national standard, so that they can go on to secondary school. They can feel confident as they start secondary school that they can do well in those subjects, and then they can go on to flourish in their GCSEs. And so much of this is about the mindset, and that's a really big thing that our tutors do to drive change with pupils. It's about their confidence, it's about their self-belief. And so often we hear pupils coming onto our program saying, oh, I hate maths, or I've never been good at maths, or I've always disliked that. Maybe you felt those things as a child yourself, maybe you remember saying them, but that sort of very defeatist mindset can be so damaging. And we want to change pupils' attitudes, their perception of the subject, whether it's English or Maths they're having support in, so that they feel, actually, I can achieve at this, I can enjoy maths, there are bits of it that are fun and satisfying, and it is possible for me to improve. And I just love the way our tutors are able to come alongside our pupils and really instill that confidence and that self-belief, and that all of that is the sort of fundamental ingredient that ultimately leads to them reaching the pass standard.
Right. Susannah, I think I read somewhere last week that more young people are receiving extra tuition more than ever, extra academic support more than ever. What is accounting for that increase? And I think that same report or story spoke about the fact that the level or the gap between the children from disadvantaged backgrounds and their better off peers is closing in terms of access to that extra academic help. Why are we seeing that positive increase?
So I think you're referring to the Sutton Trust report on tutoring that came out last week. And for a long time, the Sutton Trust have been carrying out analysis looking at trends in both private tutoring and in-school tutoring. And the main reason, to answer your question, the main reason for the change has been the introduction of the National Tutoring Programme, which the current government introduced in response to the pandemic and to support education recovery. And this was a large sum of money. I think it was about 350 million invested towards providing tutoring to enable pupils to recover post the school closures, intended mostly to be targeted at disadvantaged pupils, although in reality that hasn't always quite delivered in quite the way I think a lot of people hope that it would, so we can maybe pick that point up. But broadly, the National Tutoring Programme has made it much more common for pupils to receive tutoring in school, whether that's delivered by teaching assistants or teachers delivering extra tuition support, or whether it's by external organisations like Action Tutoring coming in to provide tutoring. tutoring, and there are a number of different tuition partners that schools can bring in externally to provide that support. But that has really boosted access to tutoring and has gone a long way to making it much more equitable than it was sort of 10 years ago when Action Tutoring was first founded. We were big supporters of the National Tutoring Programme. We campaigned for its introduction, and we know the government were keen to introduce it because there is such a strong evidence base for tutoring. It's one of the most effective things you can do to improve a pupil's academic outcome, is to give them tutoring. And that's one of the reasons that the government chose to back this as a key means of educational recovery. It's still got a long way to go. Our listeners might well be aware that the attainment gap still stands at the largest in a decade, despite all this extra support going on. I think there are a number of reasons for that, the biggest one being that the damage done by COVID, particularly for pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds, really was hugely significant, and that lost learning time and the damage done by those school closures can't just be sort of caught up on in the space of a few weeks. It's going to take a really long time to get those pupils back on track, and we know many partner schools we work with are still very much seeing those long-term effects coming through the different year groups of the impact of COVID on those pupils. So it's not a quick fix solution, and something that we really hope the government will continue to invest in tutoring for many years to come, to make sure it's reaching those that need it most, and to ultimately to drive opportunities for all pupils regardless of their background.
Yep. And another thing baffling with what you just said is that the attainment gap is at its widest, but more people are receiving tutoring. I think it's something we need to explore more in other conversations. Any questions? Let's see. There's this call to action, a new conversation series speaking to inspirational people in charity. Susannah Hardyman, CEO and founder of Action Tutoring, as my guest. I think there's another question from Carl. She's asking, what about older volunteers that might not have a degree but have equivalent qualification? I think this is related to something you mentioned earlier. If you can quickly respond to that.
Yes, we'll consider every application on merit. The main thing we're looking for is that volunteers will feel confident in front of pupils, and that they won't feel out of their depth with the materials. But we do recognise that not everybody may have a degree. So if you think that you have got the relevant skills, you have got the relevant experience to make a great tutor with a young person, please do have a conversation about us, because we're always happy to consider different circumstances once we're confident that you've got the skills needed to make a great tutor.
Yep. Susannah, recently the Office of National Statistics came out with a new report that shows that 788,000 young people are not in education, employment, or training, so they are not economically active in any way. However, the nation is experiencing a skilled worker shortage, and these young people who are not in education, employment, or training, which they are called the NEETs, are not being, optimized to, fill this gap. What do you think? What can help us bridge the gap between needs and also, sort of solve the skilled worker shortage in the medium to long term?
It does seem crazy, doesn't it, that we've got this huge sort of latent workforce that isn't active on the one hand, and then this massive skills shortage on the other. I think there are a number of things that play into it. One is those key qualifications we talked about earlier, and that being a barrier for many employers. Our listeners might be aware that the government have recently made noises about continuing with maths to the age of 18. I mean, I think broadly that could be a great policy, but as ever, the devil is in the detail, and there's a lot of concern about the implementation, the fact that we already don't have enough maths teachers out there in the country. So how are we going to be able to deliver this even further? But there is a real lack of support if pupils don't achieve those basic standards at English and maths at GCSE. There's a real lack of support for resits. A lot of pupils sitting resits, but then with no real input to help them achieve. We know fantastic charities trying to tackle that. Get Further is one of them that work in this space, offering support to pupils resitting. But I think we do need to do more to help those pupils, those 780,000, to get the qualifications they need to be able to sort of overcome that initial barrier. But of course, there are wider issues too. Mental health and confidence can be one of them. And again, we know some fantastic charities working in the employability employability space to try and help pupils to manage that transition from the age of 16 through to a path to employment. One of them is Resurgo. They have a fantastic coaching program upskilling children or young people that are NEET to help them onto that path to employment. And again, I'd love to see more investment for those kinds of programs to actually really come alongside those that are currently NEET to help them on that path. And Resurgo have some incredible success stories and statistics of not just getting young people into employment, but actually making sure they are still there 12 months down the line. So it's a really big issue. It won't be solved by any one thing, but for me, the two big things would be further investment in actually supporting resits to be done really well so that they're not just sort of a tokenistic sitting the test again, and those employability programs that really come along young people and coach and support them on that path to further education, employment or training.
Great. And businesses are really bearing the brunt of this particular skilled worker shortage. But you mentioned that corporate employees can also volunteer. So don't you think businesses can stand in this gap and help to ensure that it's solved in the medium to long term? What do you think is the role of business to play in this?
They certainly can. Those young people we work with in schools are the future workforce, so they should be in the interest of the business community to want to support that future workforce to excel. So a really practical thing businesses can do is come and volunteer with us, come and make sure that your workforce of tomorrow has got the English and maths qualifications that you're going to want to have them, going to want them to have once they're working for you. It's a really practical thing. And I think that link between schools and businesses, there's always more that can be done on that, and it can be incredibly valuable for schools to have businesses going in either as volunteers or sharing with them, but then that knock-on effect for the businesses in a few years' time that they've got a ready workforce coming through.
That's great. Let's see if we have any other questions from our amazing audience. Okay, none. Great. Great. This is good. So the workforce of tomorrow, we need to support them now. They are young people. So whatever role anyone can play, it's a collective solution. Let's do this. So no comments or questions from our Facebook audience now. So I'll just go straight to our very final question before we end our call to action episode. So Susannah, people are going to watch us. People are watching us currently, and they're thinking, how can I support young people? Although it's a climate of rising cost of living and so many other external issues, what can they do in their own power to support young people in the work that Action Tutoring is doing? What's your call to action to them?
Number one thing you could do is come and join us as a volunteer tutor. It's just an hour of your week of your time. And as mentioned, all the resources and training are provided. So you don't need to be a curriculum expert. You don't need to be a former teacher, but come and give an hour a week to working with one of our brilliant pupils. And you'll soon see that impact on their confidence, their motivation that I talked about earlier. And I think there's nothing more inspiring than seeing them make that transition. I saw a beautiful quote recently from one of our pupils that said, "Thank you for helping me with my struggle. I do really appreciate you." And I just thought, that pupil acknowledgement of their struggle, but that tutor ability to come in and overcome it is incredibly powerful. So join us as a volunteer. But if you can't volunteer or you want to volunteer, but you want to go further, why not spread the word to your family and friends, share our social media posts, tell them about the work that we're doing, say if they can volunteer. Perhaps you work in a company or know others that do. Could that company be one of these corporate partners? We'd love to come forward and help to build the workforce of tomorrow. So a huge amount around volunteering. And of course, there's always the option of donating to our work as well. We are a charity and our tutors are volunteers, but we do have a paid staff team needed to manage and support, coordinate the volunteers, manage those partnerships with schools and so on. And all of that does take funding to run. So that's another very practical way that any listeners could support us.
Volunteer, donate, advocate, whichever way you can help support Action Tutoring, please take that action. So on that positive note, thank you for joining us on Call to Action. Susannah Hardyman, it's a privilege to have hosted you. She's the founder and CEO of Action Tutoring. And to you, our audience on Facebook, thanks for tuning in and sharing your questions. Have a great weekend while, at it. I'm Henry Devon. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.